She had built an empire from salt water and steel, and tonight, someone inside it was planning to take everything. At the edge of the Seattle waterfront, where the Puget Sound stretched dark and cold beneath a sky full of borrowed light, Serena Vale stood in a room full of people who wanted something from her. They always did. Investors in Italian suits, board members with practiced smiles, journalists angling for a quote they could twist into a headline by morning. She had learned years ago that the only thing more exhausting than climbing was standing still at the top while everyone else sharpened their knives below. She didn't know yet that one of those knives was already moving, and she certainly didn't know that the man who would change everything was standing near the service exit, arguing with a tray of empty champagne glasses, and winning. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Stay with us all the way to the end. You won't regret it. The event was called the Pacific Horizon Gala, which was exactly the kind of name that sounded important, without meaning anything specific. It happened every October at the Meridian Club, a converted maritime warehouse perched on the edge of Elliott Bay that some architect had spent a small fortune making look effortless. Exposed steel beams, floor-to-ceiling glass, the city lights of Seattle rippling across the black water 40 feet below. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with the quiet efficiency of people who had been trained never to make eye contact unless spoken to first. Landon Pierce had been spoken to exactly twice in the past 2 hours, and both times it was someone asking him to bring more sparkling water. He didn't mind. Not really. He'd shown up as a +1 to Marcus Webb, his oldest friend and the closest thing to a business partner he had. Marcus ran a marine equipment supply company that had been doing well enough lately to score an invitation to this kind of event, and he dragged Landon along with the logic that you never know who you might meet. Landon had borrowed a jacket from Marcus's closet, a navy blazer 2 inches too long in the sleeve, and stood at the edge of the room feeling precisely as out of place as he looked. He was 32 years old. He ran a small boat repair operation out of a rented slip at Fisherman's Terminal. 3 full-time employees, a fourth he couldn't quite afford but kept anyway because Denny was 64 and had nowhere else to go, and a client list that hovered perpetually between almost stable and quietly desperate. 6 months ago, a major contract had fallen through when the fishing company that had been his anchor client sold their fleet and walked away. Since then, Landon had been managing the business the way you manage a slow leak, stuffing rags into the gaps and hoping for dry weather. He was not, by any reasonable definition, the kind of person who belonged at a $1,500 a plate charity gala. But here he was, holding a glass of sparkling water he'd poured himself because it was free and he was thirsty, watching a room full of people in clothes that probably cost more than his monthly rent. That was when he noticed the woman near the far window. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Dark hair swept back, a deep green dress, the kind of posture that looks effortless until you realize it's been practiced. He noticed her because she looked exactly the way he felt, trapped, performing, calculating the distance to the nearest exit. She was surrounded by 4 men in suits who were all talking at once, their body language the barely restrained urgency of people who believed their time was more valuable than anyone else's. One of them, older, silver-haired, the aggressive bonhomie of someone who'd been told his whole life that confidence was the same thing as competence, kept touching her arm when he made a point. She kept angling her shoulder away from his hand without being obvious about it. Landon watched her do it 3 times in a row. She was good, practiced. But the 4th time, right as the silver-haired man's hand found its way to her elbow again, he saw her jaw tighten just barely. A half second of something real breaking through the surface. He didn't make a decision exactly. He moved before he'd thought it through, the way you grab a falling object before your brain has processed its falling. He walked across the room, scooped up an empty tray from a passing server who looked mildly offended by this, and appeared at her elbow. "Excuse me," he said, directing it somewhere between her and the suits. "Miss Vale, there's a call you've been waiting for. They said it's urgent." The woman turned and looked at him. Up close, her eyes were darker than he'd expected. There was a brief beat where she was reading him, assessing, deciding. Then something shifted. "Right," she said. "Thank you." And to the men, "Gentlemen, I'll find you in a few minutes." She walked with him. He held the empty tray like it meant something. They made it to a service corridor behind a set of heavy curtains before she stopped walking and turned to face him. "You're not staff," she said. It wasn't a question. "Borrowed a tray." "For what?" "You looked like you needed an exit." He paused. "I could be wrong." She looked at him for a long second, then she almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "You're not wrong." She held out her hand. "Serena Vale." "I know who you are." He shook it. "Landon Pierce." "Should I know who you are?" "Probably not. I fix boats." "Boats?" she repeated, like she was testing the word. "Old ones, mostly. The kind that keep almost dying but don't quite make it there yet." He heard himself saying it and had a brief internal conversation about stopping. He didn't. "Kind of a theme in my life, actually." Something cracked open in her expression. Not pity. Something more complicated than that. "That might be the most honest thing anyone said to me tonight." She glanced back toward the curtain. "How much longer do you think I need to hide back here before it's socially acceptable?" "Depends how fast the silver-haired guy gives up." "Gerald Marsh." Her voice flattened slightly on the name. "He doesn't give up. It's actually his most notable quality and also his worst one." "Board member?" "Investor. Wants to get closer to the board." She tilted her head. "You know your maritime industry." "I know Gerald Marsh's name from the business section. He's been trying to buy into deepwater tech for 3 years. Landon adjusted his grip on the borrowed tray. "He was also touching your arm every 45 seconds, which I'm guessing wasn't invited." Serena looked at him with an expression that was harder to read now. "No," she said after a moment. "It wasn't." "I figured." The corridor was quiet. From beyond the curtain, the gala hummed with its own momentum. Music, conversation, the percussive clink of glasses. And here it was just the two of them, and the low-grade hum of a ventilation system that sounded like it was working hard. Serena exhaled and leaned one shoulder against the wall. The deliberate posture from the main room had slipped away. She looked tired. Not devastated, not fragile. Just tired in the way that people get when they've been holding something heavy for a long time. "I hate these things," she said, almost to herself. "Then why come?" "Because not coming costs more than coming." She looked at the tray in his hand. "Were you actually passing that around, or did you just grab it for cover?" "Just cover, but I was thinking about repurposing it as a shield if Gerald Marsh got aggressive." She laughed. "A real one. Short and genuine, nothing performed about it." It changed her whole face. "Come on," she said. "If I have to go back out there, at least walk with me. They leave you alone if you look like you're in the middle of something." "I'm a visual prop." "An effective one." They went back through the curtain, and she was right. Something about having someone next to her changed the calculus of the room. Gerald Marsh spotted her from across the crowd, but made no move to close the distance. The journalists hovering at the edges recalibrated and drifted toward easier targets. Serena moved through the space more loosely, more like herself, and Landon walked beside her holding an empty tray he'd completely forgotten to put down. They made a slow circuit of the room. She asked him questions about the boat repair business with what seemed like genuine curiosity, not the polite variety people use to fill silence, but actual follow-up questions. What kind of vessels? How long had he been doing it? What was the actual hard part? Was it the mechanical work or the business end? He answered honestly, which meant saying things like, "The hard part is staying solvent," and "I keep hiring people I can't technically afford because otherwise I feel bad," neither of which were things you were supposed to say in rooms like this. She told him she'd inherited control of Vale Marine Technologies 4 years ago when her grandfather died, that the company had been a mid-size operation making navigational equipment, and her grandfather had been trying to expand into research vessel design before he passed, that she had taken a company with 42 employees and turned it into something with nearly 2,000, that this fact was endlessly cited in articles about her and almost never actually asked about. "What would you want them to ask about?" Landon said. "What it cost," she said simply. Then she seemed to catch herself and looked sideways at him. "Sorry, I don't usually... You're easy to talk to." "I've been told also that I talk too much, so..." Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. He noticed toward the end of the evening that the room had thinned, The kind of gradual exit that happens after 10 when the official program winds down and people start calculating their drives home. The reporters were mostly gone. Gerald Marsh was talking to a cluster of people near the bar, his back to the room. Serena had been stopped briefly by someone she clearly needed to speak to, a woman with an organization name on her lanyard, something charity adjacent, and Landon had stepped back to give them space. He'd ended up near the window. The view of the Sound was extraordinary from here, the water dark and enormous under a cloud-diffused moon, the lights of the ferries blinking their patient paths across the bay. He'd been looking at water his whole life. He still wasn't tired of it. "Nice, isn't it?" He turned. Serena had finished her conversation and come to stand beside him. She was closer than she needed to be. The room behind them was just noise now, irrelevant. "Best thing about the venue," he said. She looked out at the water for a moment. Then she said quietly, "My grandfather used to say the Sound was the only honest thing about Seattle. Everything else here is performing for someone." Landon didn't say anything. He looked out at the black water and thought about that. "He sounds like he was interesting," he said finally. "He was the best person I knew." She said it without sentiment, just factual weight. They stood there for a moment in the comfortable silence of two people who had discovered, against reasonable odds, that they didn't need to fill the air between them. Then Marcus materialized at Landon's elbow, slightly flushed from the open bar and glowing with the specific energy of someone who'd had a successful networking night. "There you are. I've been looking for you for—" He stopped when he saw Serena, and the flush on his face deepened one register. "Oh, hi. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," Serena said pleasantly. Marcus looked at Landon, then at Serena, then at the two of them together, side by side at the window, and something in his expression went through a quick private computation that landed somewhere between surprised and impressed. "Marcus Webb," he said, extending his hand to Serena with a grin. "Landon's business associate and apparently terrible chaperone." "Serena Vale," she said, shaking it. "Oh, I know." Marcus glanced at Landon. "You've been standing here talking to Serena Vale." "That's what's been happening, yeah. For like 2 hours. Give or take." Marcus looked genuinely delighted. "Buddy, can you give us a minute?" Landon said. "Absolutely. Take your time. I'll just be over here having a small cardiac event." Marcus wandered toward the bar with a smile broad enough to be considered a navigation hazard. Serena watched him go. "He seems like he keeps things interesting." That's the kindest way to describe him. Landon looked toward the exit, where Marcus was now almost certainly telling the story of what he'd just witnessed to the nearest willing listener. "I should probably go rescue whatever narrative he's currently constructing." "Probably." She turned to look at him. "I don't usually do this." "Do what?" "Spend an entire evening talking to someone I met in a service corridor." A brief pause. "Someone who clearly doesn't need anything from me." "Oh, I've needed things tonight. The free sparkling water alone has been a real highlight." She looked at him with something that might have been exasperation and something else underneath that. "I'm serious. It was—" She seemed to be searching for the right word and picking carefully. "Unusual. The good kind." "Yeah," he said. "It was." He meant to say something else. Probably something smart, or at least neutral. Instead, because his brain and his mouth had a somewhat casual relationship with each other, what came out was, "Whoever ends up staying by your side through all of that." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the reporters, at Gerald Marsh's oblivious back, at the whole heavy machinery of her life. "They're going to be one lucky person." He'd said it lightly. Lightly enough that it could be a throwaway line, a compliment between strangers, something that dissolved harmlessly in the air. But she didn't look away. And what she said next, quietly, with a precision that left no room for ambiguity, "I was hoping it could be you." The room went on existing around them. The remaining guests laughed at something near the bar. A waiter collected glasses with practiced efficiency. The Sound lay black and patient beyond the glass. Landon looked at her. She looked back. He couldn't quite read the expression, or rather, he could read it, and the reading made him uncomfortable because it wasn't the polished performance he'd half expected. It was something unguarded and slightly terrifying, the look of someone who'd said a true thing out loud. He laughed. He didn't mean to, but he laughed. The automatic laugh of a person whose first reflex when confronted with something real is to make it smaller. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She smiled, not the almost smile from the corridor, not the laugh from earlier, something quieter. I'll see you around, Landon Pierce. She moved away. Someone caught her at the edge of the room, a board member, from the body language, and she stepped back into her professional self so smoothly it was like watching water close over a stone. He stood at the window for another minute, looking at the sound. Then Marcus was back at his elbow, holding 2 glasses of water with the demeanor of someone delivering sacred objects. I don't want to make a big thing of this, Marcus said, making a big thing of this. But did Serena Vale just don't? I'm just saying what I observed. Marcus. You laughed, Marcus said. You laughed when she said it. That's the most Landon thing that's ever happened to any Landon. I thought she was joking. Marcus looked at him with the steady patience of someone who'd known him for 20 years. Was she? Landon didn't answer. He looked out at the water. He thought about dark eyes reading him in a service corridor. A real laugh that changed a face. Someone saying, I was hoping it could be you, with the specific weight of a person who chooses every word and doesn't waste them. I don't know, he said finally. And that was the truth. Cham. He drove home through the wet Seattle night with the radio off, the city going quiet around him. His apartment was in Ballard, a 2-bedroom in a building that smelled permanently of the sea, which he'd always liked, even before he understood why. He'd moved there after the divorce 4 years ago, when Mia was 4, and the world had rearranged itself into something he didn't quite recognize yet. His daughter was asleep when he got in. He could hear her through the cracked door of her room, the specific breathing rhythm that parents learn to read the way sailors read weather. Even, steady, fine. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the small shape under the dinosaur blanket she'd refused to give up, despite being 8 now, and in her own words, definitely too old for dinosaurs, but they're actually still pretty good. He went to the kitchen and stood over the sink, drinking a glass of tap water in the dark. The boat repair business. 3 employees and a 4th he kept out of stubbornness. A lease on a slip at Fisherman's Terminal that was due for renegotiation in 4 months. An overdraft line of credit he'd tapped twice in the last year. A reputation for doing excellent work on exactly the kind of vessels that were slowly becoming obsolete as the industry moved toward the newer, cleaner, composite hull designs that required different tools and different expertise than he had. Whoever ends up staying by your side through all of that. He'd said it without thinking. The careless sympathy of someone looking at someone else's heavy life from a comfortable distance. But standing in his kitchen at midnight with an overdraft he didn't mention to anyone, and a daughter asleep down the hall in a dinosaur blanket, Landon understood something he hadn't quite looked at directly in a while. His life was also heavy. He'd just gotten so used to the weight he'd stopped noticing he was carrying it. He rinsed the glass, went to bed. Lay in the dark looking at the ceiling, listening to the Ballard night. A distant foghorn, the occasional car on the wet street below, the particular quiet of a city that never goes entirely silent. He thought, she wasn't joking. He thought, she was absolutely joking. He thought, I have no idea what she was doing. He slept badly and woke early, which was normal. Made coffee. Walked Mia to the school bus. Drove to the terminal in the gray October morning and spent the first 2 hours replacing a rotted cleat mount on a 30-foot sloop, whose owner kept apologizing for the condition of the vessel in a way that suggested he'd been putting off the repair for some time. By noon, he'd mostly stopped thinking about the gala. By Friday, he'd almost entirely stopped. The call came the following Tuesday morning, just before 8. He was under the stern of an aging trawler, his arms elbow-deep in a raw fiberglass repair, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He climbed out, stripped a glove, answered. Mr. Pierce? A woman's voice, professional, precise. My name is Jocelyn Harrow. I'm calling on behalf of Serena Vale. She'd like to speak with you about a potential contract if you have a few minutes. He stood there with fiberglass dust on his forearms and a small streak of epoxy on the side of his neck and said, Yeah, sure, okay. Excellent. Can you hold briefly? He held. He looked around the shop. Denny bent over a workbench fitting new hardware to a railing, his two younger employees, Daniel and Kira, running a grinder over a keel patch in a sound that would have been painful in an enclosed space. Normal Tuesday. Normal life. Landon, her voice on the phone was different from the gala, crisper. The tiredness was gone, replaced by the particular efficiency of someone in the middle of a long day. But he recognized it. Serena Vale, he said. You actually called. I said I'd see you around. A brief pause. I have a project I think your company might be suited for. A vessel. She's currently berthed at a private dock in Shill's Hole. My grandfather owned her. I inherited her with the estate. She's been sitting for 2 years and she needs significant work. What kind of vessel? Research ship, 53 feet. Wood composite hybrid hull, older design. She was built in the 90s. My grandfather used her for deep water survey work before he got too sick to take her out. Another pause. I want her restored, not cosmetically. I want her operational. Landon processed this. A 53-foot wood composite research vessel from the 90s, sitting neglected for 2 years. That was serious structural work. A minimum of several months if the damage was what he expected, potentially longer. I'd need to come look at her before I could give you anything realistic. I know. Can you come Thursday? I can come Thursday. Good. Something in her voice shifted a fraction. Landon, I want to be straightforward with you. The reason I'm calling you specifically and not a larger firm is that I don't want this project publicized. She was my grandfather's, and the work she carried is, there are things about her I'm not ready to put in front of a crew of 50 people I don't know. A beat. I want someone who actually cares about old boats. I care about old boats, he said. It's honestly my main personality trait. She was quiet for a moment, and he thought he could almost hear the almost smile. Thursday then, 8 o'clock. I'll text you the dock address. Okay? And Landon. Her voice was even, calibrated. Try not to be surprised that I called. The line went dead. He stood in the shop holding the phone, with fiberglass dust on his arms and an epoxy streak drying against his neck. Denny had stopped working and was looking at him with the particular interest of a man who'd been around long enough to read situations from a distance. Good call, Denny said. Could be a contract, Landon said. Big? Yeah, could be big. He looked at the phone in his hand. Don't tell Daniel and Kira yet. I need to look at the job first. Smart, Denny said, and went back to his hardware. Landon put the phone in his pocket and climbed back under the trawler. The epoxy repair needed another 40 minutes. He focused on that. He did not spend 40 minutes thinking about Serena Vale. He spent about 35 minutes thinking about her, and 5 on the epoxy, which was not ideal, but was what it was. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. The kind of Seattle October morning that looked like it was going to rain for the entire rest of the calendar year. Landon got to the Shill's Hole address at 7:55, which for him was late. He was normally a 7 o'clock person, and found the private dock gate already open with a keypad code Serena had texted him the night before. The vessel was at the far end of the dock. He saw her from 30 yards away and stopped walking. She was a 53-foot Crowley research design, mid-90s vintage, and even neglected she was something. The kind of boat that had been built by people who believed vessels should be built to last, not built to be replaced. Wood composite construction that you almost never saw anymore, the kind that required genuine craft to maintain and genuine expertise to repair. She'd been white once, and the waterline was clean enough to suggest someone had at least covered her properly. But 2 years of weather had worked at her paint, and the teak decking was badly weathered, and the name on the stern had faded past legibility. He could see without getting close that the hull was soft in at least 2 places amidships. The standing rigging was corroded. One of the port lights was cracked. The main hatch cover sat slightly crooked in a way that meant either the frame had warped or the hatch itself had, neither of which was a quick fix. He was also, despite himself, immediately in love with her. She's not pretty right now. He turned. Serena was coming down the dock toward him in a dark coat carrying 2 cups of coffee. Different from the gala. No dress, no performance. Jeans, boots, her hair pulled back without ceremony. She looked slightly tired and completely real. "She's pretty," he said, "just not in good shape." "Those two things can coexist." She held out one of the cups. "Black," I guessed. "Correct guess, He took it. "She's been covered?" "I had someone maintain the cover and basic bilge pump monthly. That's all I could manage until—" She stopped. "Until I had time to think about what I wanted to do with her." He looked back at the boat. "What do you want to do with her?" "Put her back in the water. Actually in the water, not just floating at a dock." She came to stand beside him, looking at the vessel with an expression that was harder to read than it had seemed. "My grandfather was doing research before he died. Deep water ecological surveys. Independent work, outside the company. He cared about it." A pause. "I want to be able to finish what he started. Eventually." Landon nodded. He set down his coffee on the dock railing and pulled out his phone for photos, then stopped. "Can I go aboard?" "That's why you're here." He spent the next 90 minutes going over her, every inch he could access. The hull soft spots he'd identified from the dock were worse than he'd expected in one place and better in another, which was about average for this kind of survey. The keel bolts needed inspection. He couldn't do that without haul-out. The electrical system was a write-off. He'd need to strip and rerun from the panel forward. The engine, a Volvo diesel that was old but theoretically repairable, turned over when he hit the starter, which was more than he'd expected. The interior was something else entirely. Every surface was covered in careful protective wrapping. Someone had done this methodically, with the kind of attention that meant something to them. Beneath the wrapping, charts, books, instruments, equipment that was dated but well maintained. A small workspace in the main cabin with drawers of handwritten notes in precise, compact script, files in labeled folders. A laptop so old it was past the point of usefulness, but kept anyway. He didn't open anything, but he could see from the quality of the organization that this had been a working space. Someone had used this boat like a second office, or maybe a first one, the kind of place where the real thinking happened. He came back up on deck, where Serena was sitting on the dock railing, having apparently decided to let him work without commentary. "The electrical needs to be redone completely," he said. "Hull soft spots. There are 3. The one amidships port side is significant. The other 2 are manageable. Keel bolts need inspection on haul-out. I can't promise you anything on those until I see them. Teak deck is past saving on the port forward section. The rest can be worked. Standing rigging, replace everything. Don't try to reuse any of it. Engine is a maybe, depends what the survey shows once we get her out of the water." Serena listened to all of this without expression. "Timeline? 6 months if everything we find is in the range of what I expect. Could be 8 if the keel bolts are bad, or if there's structural damage under the hull. I can't see from here." "And cost?" He'd done rough math in his head during the inspection. He gave her a number. It was, he was aware, a substantial number. The kind that would tell him something about the conversation depending on how she responded. She nodded once. "Can you start within 2 weeks?" "I need to haul out first. Haul out at Shill's Hole Yard. I can schedule that for next week if there's a slot." "There's a slot. I reserved it last week." She said it without particular emphasis, but he registered it. She'd already been planning to move forward before he'd even inspected the boat. "You were pretty confident I'd take the job." "No," she said. "I was prepared." "Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him steadily. "Will you take it?" He looked back at the boat. The neglected teak, the failing rigging, the hull soft spots that were going to be a genuine fight to repair properly. The interior full of a dead man's careful work, wrapped and waiting. "Yeah," he said. "I'll take it." Something in her posture changed, slightly, barely, not relief exactly, closer to settling. "Good." She stood, put her coffee cup in her coat pocket. "I'll have Jocelyn send over the contract framework today. You can mark it up however you need to." She paused. "I want to be involved in the process, not in the way, I'm not going to tell you how to do your job, but this boat matters to me and I want to understand what's happening to her." You're welcome on site whenever you want. Thank you. She glanced at the vessel one more time. She has a name, by the way. It's faded on the stern, but it's still there if you look close. He hadn't been able to read it from the dock. He turned and looked. The paint was gone in places, but the shape of the letters was still in the fiberglass beneath, ghost white against white. He moved down the dock until the angle was right. Marguerite. His wife? Landon guessed. His wife. Serena said it with the particular weight of a word that arrives already carrying its own history. He looked at the name on the stern, then at the woman standing on the dock with her coffee and her careful posture and her grandfather's boat between them like a question she wasn't quite asking. We'll take care of her, he said. Serena looked at him. I know, she said. Simple. Final. Like she'd already decided that before he arrived. He went back to the shop and told his crew about the contract. Denny said, "About time," without asking about any of the specifics. Daniel and Kira asked the sensible questions, timeline, scope, whether they'd need to bring in any specialized help. He answered what he could and said he'd know more once they got Marguerite on the hard. That night, helping Mia with a school project about the water cycle, she was at the kitchen table surrounded by markers and a poster board that kept sliding, and she was deeply annoyed about the poster board. He found himself thinking about the boat, about the interior, the wrapped instruments, and the handwritten notes, and the drawers full of research from a man who'd cared about something enough to spend his last healthy years chasing it. "Dad?" Mia said. "Are you listening?" "Clouds," he said. "You were explaining clouds." She gave him the look. She'd had this look since she was 5, tolerant, slightly disappointed, the expression of someone who has concluded that adults are managing but not optimal. "I was explaining condensation, which is a type of cloud thing." "Right, condensation." "I'm listening." "You're thinking about something." "I'm doing both." She considered this with the judicious skepticism of an 8-year-old who has learned that adults saying they can do 2 things at once is usually a lie. "Is it about work?" "Kind of." "Is it a good kind of work?" He thought about the boat, about the soft hull and the ruined rigging and the old Volvo diesel that might be savable and the name painted ghost white into fiberglass. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." Mia went back to her condensation. He held a marker steady for the poster board. Outside, the Seattle night pressed against the kitchen window, and somewhere across the city, the sound moved in the dark the way it always did, patient and indifferent and real. He didn't know yet what was waiting for them. None of them did. The Marguerite came out of the water the following Monday morning. What they found under the hull would take 3 days to fully document and 2 weeks to fully understand. And somewhere inside the vessel's sealed interior, in a filing drawer beneath layers of protective wrap, was a hard drive and a folder of documents that Serena's grandfather had spent the last year of his life protecting. Landon wouldn't find those for another 6 weeks. By then, a great deal would have already changed. The Marguerite came out of the water on a Monday, and what the haul-out revealed was bad enough that Landon stood at the base of the travel lift for a full 2 minutes without saying anything. Denny came to stand beside him, hands in his pockets, looking up at the exposed hull with the quiet appraisal of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that silence after a haul-out usually meant money. "How bad?" Denny said. "The keel bolts." Landon pointed at the aft section where the ballast keel met the fiberglass, or was supposed to meet it. 3 of them are gone. Not corroded. Gone. Someone pulled them and didn't replace them properly. That's not age. No, that's neglect with a specific shape to it. He walked the length of the hull slowly, crouching at the stern. The soft spot he'd identified from the dock was worse than he'd estimated. A section roughly 18 inches across where the wood composite laminate had delaminated from the fiberglass beneath, creating a void that would have made the vessel genuinely dangerous at speed in open water. She was maintained on the surface. Someone made sure she looked okay from the dock. But below the waterline, nobody was paying attention. Or somebody wanted her to stay exactly where she was, Denny said. Landon looked at him. Denny shrugged, the way he always shrugged, slowly, with the complete non-urgency of a man who had seen too many things to get excited about his own theories. "Just saying what I see," Denny said, and walked back to the shop. Landon spent the rest of the morning documenting. He was on his third set of photos when his phone buzzed. "Can I come by this afternoon?" "S." He replied, "Haul out yard, not the shop. Come after 2." She arrived at 2:15, on foot, in the same dark coat from the dock inspection. She walked the length of the Marguerite slowly, the way he'd walked it, looking without speaking first, which he'd noticed was something she did, looked before she talked. He appreciated that in people. She stopped at the delaminated section. "That's significant." "Yeah." "You said it might be manageable." "I said the other 2 soft spots were manageable. This one I couldn't fully assess until she was out of the water." He came to stand beside her. "The keel bolts are the bigger concern. 3 of them were improperly replaced at some point. Wrong size, wrong grade. One of them came out when we lifted her." Serena looked at the hull. Her expression was controlled, but he'd spent enough hours around her now to read past the control. Something underneath it was tight. When would that have been done? Based on the corrosion pattern around the replacements, I'd say 18 months to 2 years ago. Not original work. She was quiet for a moment. "She was in active use 2.5 years ago. My grandfather took her out 3 weeks before he was diagnosed. So someone worked on her between then and when she was covered." "She was covered immediately after he died. I arranged it." Her voice was flat in the specific way of a person keeping something compressed, which means it was done while he was sick, while she was still active. Landon didn't say anything. The implication was there without needing to be said. Someone had accessed the vessel during the period when her grandfather was sick and dying and not paying attention to what was happening at the dock. "Who had access to her?" he said. "Besides my grandfather. His estate manager for a time. A few people from the company who handled the inventory of his assets after he died." She turned and looked at him. "I need to know something. What you're describing, the keel bolts especially. If someone wanted to make sure this vessel never went back in the water, is this how they do it?" He held her gaze. "It's one way. Not obviously sabotage. It looks like deferred maintenance. But the specific combination of things wrong with her below the waterline, yes. If you wanted a boat to slowly become too dangerous to sail without appearing to have touched her, this would be in the direction of how you do it." She nodded. "Once." The expression didn't change. "Fix her," she said. "All of it. Whatever it takes." "That's what you're paying me for." "I'm also paying you to not discuss the specifics of this work with anyone outside your crew." "That was already in the contract." "I know." She looked at the hull one more time. "My grandfather built something important on that boat, Landon. Whatever he was researching in the last 2 years of his life, I think someone didn't want it finished. He wanted to ask more. He could see she wasn't going to give him more, not today." "Okay," he said. "We'll take care of her." She looked at him. "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." Something shifted in her face, not warmth exactly, more like recognition. Then she put it back where it had come from and pulled her phone out to take her own photographs of the hull, and the moment was just a moment again. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that Landon hadn't expected. Serena came to the yard 3 times in the first week, and twice a week after that. She never hovered. She'd arrive, look at whatever progress had been made, ask specific questions, and then either stay for an hour or leave in 20 minutes, depending on what her day held. She didn't pretend to know more about boat restoration than she did. Which was almost nothing, but she asked good questions and remembered the answers, and she had the unusual quality of being able to watch people work without making them feel observed. Denny liked her immediately, which was not something Denny did easily or quickly. He'd decided within the first week that she was no bullshit, which from Denny was equivalent to a formal endorsement. Daniel and Kira were starstruck for about 4 days, and then got over it when they realized she wasn't going to act like a billionaire or expect them to act any particular way around her. She brought coffee sometimes. She didn't make a performance of it. The work itself was absorbing and occasionally infuriating in exactly the way that Landon loved. The keel bolts took a week to properly rebed and torque. The delaminated hull section required a layup repair that he and Daniel had to do in 2 stages because the cure cycle demanded it, and there was no shortcutting the chemistry. The electrical system came out in pieces over the better part of 10 days, miles of corroded wiring that Kira extracted with methodical patience while narrating her disgust at whoever had originally installed it. On a Thursday in mid-November, Landon was below deck rerunning the main power distribution when he heard footsteps on the boarding ramp, and then Serena's voice, and then a second voice, smaller and higher, saying, "Whoa!" He came up through the main hatch to find Serena standing on the dock beside an 8-year-old girl in a green jacket and rubber boots, who was staring at the Marguerite with the total absorption of someone encountering something categorically excellent. "Landon," Serena said, "I hope this is okay. My afternoon appointment canceled, and Mia's school had a half day, and your daughter was standing outside the terminal gate, looking like she was trying to will the security code into existence." "I knew where it was," Mia said. "I just didn't have it." "She called me from the gate," Serena said, "because apparently I'm in your phone as Marguerite Job." "That's my contact name," Landon said. "It's not the most romantic label I've ever had," Serena said, "but I've had worse." Mia was still looking at the boat. "Is this the one? The one you've been working on?" "This is the one." She turned to look at Serena with the directness that children deploy before they learn to be subtle. "Is this your boat?" "It was my grandfather's," Serena said. "Now it's mine." "What's it called?" "Marguerite." That was his wife's name. Mia considered this. "She died?" "A long time ago. And he named his boat after her, so she was still kind of around." Serena was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I think that's exactly right." Mia looked at the boat again with new respect, then at Serena, then back at the boat. "Can I go inside?" "If your dad says it's okay." "Dad?" Landon was watching Serena's face. She'd gone somewhere briefly, somewhere private and unguarded, and was coming back. "Yeah, go ahead. Stay out of the forward cabin. We've got tools everywhere." Mia went up the boarding ramp with the focused energy of a child who has been given permission to explore something. They could hear her moving around inside, her boots on the new teak sections they'd laid in the past week, the occasional "oh cool" drifting up through the open hatch. Serena looked at him. "She's a lot like you." "How do you mean?" The way she looked at the boat before she said anything, taking it in first. A brief pause. "She's good." "She is," he said. "Simple as that." They stood on the dock in the November cold. The yard was quieter in the afternoon. Most of the crews working other vessels had knocked off by now, and it was just the sound of the water and the distant industrial hum of the city, and from inside the Marguerite, the sound of his daughter discovering an old barometer and trying to figure out what it measured. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "The research your grandfather was doing, you said you thought someone didn't want it finished." He looked at her. "Is that someone inside your company?" She held his gaze for a moment without answering. He'd noticed she did this. Took the time to decide how much she was going to say before she said it. He'd started to appreciate it as a quality, even when it was frustrating. "I don't know yet," she said finally. "There are people at Vale Marine who've been trying to redirect the company's focus for the past year, away from the research side toward faster commercial returns. My grandfather built the research division. He believed it was where the real value was. Ecological deep water survey technology, long-duration autonomous systems." She looked out at the water. "There are members of my board who think that's a vanity project, who want to sell the division and consolidate around what's already profitable. And you don't. My grandfather spent 40 years building something he believed in. I'm not selling it so 3 people in expensive suits can hit a quarterly number." Her jaw tightened. "But they're persistent. And lately they've been, I don't know, more organized than I'd expect." "Who's leading it?" She looked at him. "Formally, nobody. Informally, a man named Carter Rhodes. He's been with the company 12 years, CFO for the last 4. A pause. "He's good at his job. Better than I'd like him to be, honestly." Mia's voice floated up from below. "Dad, there's a fish finder down here, and it's ancient. It's like from before I was born." "Most things are from before you were born," Landon called back. "That's technically true, but still means it's old." Serena almost smiled. Almost. "How long has it just been the 2 of you?" "Since she was 4. He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. "That's a long time to carry a business and a kid." "She's the easier one," he said. She looked at him with an expression he still couldn't quite fully decode. Something that was maybe appreciation, and maybe something more than that, and maybe neither. I should get her back to the gate before dark, she said. But if it's okay, I'd like to come back Saturday. I want to start going through the interior files, my grandfather's notes. The boat's locked when we're not here. You'll need the key code. You trust me with the key code? You're the owner of the vessel. Technically, yes. She said it was something underneath it that he didn't try to interpret. He gave her the code. She called down to Mia that they were heading out, and there was a brief protest from below. 5 more minutes, there's a whole drawer of charts, which they both pretended not to hear. When Mia finally came up the boarding ramp, she had a small folded chart in her hand that she was examining with deep concentration. Can I borrow this? It's got depth readings for the whole sound. That's not really, Landon started. Of course, Serena said. Keep it. Mia looked up at her, a long, evaluating look that had something of her father's directness in it, but was entirely her own. You're nice, she said, like she'd made a decision. Serena blinked. Thank you. Dad said you were the lady from the boat job. He didn't say you were actually nice. Mia. That's fair, Serena said. Most people in my position aren't. Mia nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to studying the chart. Serena glanced at Landon. He could see she was working to keep her expression neutral and not entirely succeeding. Saturday, she said. Saturday, he said. She walked back up the dock. Mia watched her go, then looked at her father with the expression she used when she had something to say that she was deciding whether or not to actually say. What? He said. Nothing, Mia said. That's a very loud nothing. She went back to the chart. I'm just looking at the depth readings, Dad. Serena came on Saturday, and the 2 Saturdays after that, and what she found in her grandfather's files took her longer than she'd expected. Landon gave her space to work. He'd come in, do his own tasks, and she'd be at the main cabin table with folders spread around her and a laptop open, and they'd talk when there was something to talk about, and let the silence be what it was when there wasn't. It was the most comfortable working silence he'd had in a long time. He wasn't sure what to do with that. The research notes were meticulous. Victor Vale, Serena's grandfather, had been, from what Landon could piece together from what she shared, a methodical man with a specific obsession. He'd been developing a long-duration underwater survey system that used passive acoustic technology to map deep-water ecosystems with a precision that existing commercial technology couldn't touch. Low power consumption, high accuracy, deployable from a vessel like the Marguerite without a full research crew. The kind of technology that could have applications in commercial fishery management, maritime environmental compliance, offshore construction planning. This is worth money, Landon said on the 3rd Saturday, looking at one of the technical schematics she'd placed in front of him for a second opinion on the mechanical components. A lot of money, Serena said. She was sitting across from him with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold. He filed provisional patents on the core signal processing architecture 2 years before he died. The question is, what happened to those filings? You don't know. The company's IP team is handling the estate filings. I've been asking for a full inventory for 4 months. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it. I keep getting told it's being compiled. Landon looked at the schematic. This kind of technology. Who in the deep water survey space would want it? She looked at him steadily. Several companies, including one named Northgate Marine Systems, which is a competitor we've been in conflict with over a government contract for 2 years. And Carter Rhodes. Carter Rhodes was on the committee that flagged the research division as a non-core asset 8 months ago. She said it without emphasis. The emphasis wasn't needed. He set down the schematic. Serena. I know. You need to talk to someone about this. A lawyer, not just me. I have lawyers. A pause. I have a lot of lawyers. What I don't have is evidence. I have a pattern that looks like something and a dead man's research notes and a boat that someone apparently tried to make unsaleable. She pushed the schematic aside and looked at the table for a moment. The patents would tell me everything. If those filings were tampered with, if someone in my own IP department altered or delayed them. She stopped. "That's not a civil matter," he said. "No, it's not." She said it matter-of-factly, but he heard what was underneath the matter-of-fact. The weight of it. The specific exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a suspicion alone long enough that it had changed shape on her. "How long have you known?" he said. She thought about it, really thought about it, which he appreciated. Known that something was wrong inside the company? 8 months. Known it might reach this far? She looked at the files on the table around them. "Since I found these? Since before you called me?" "Yes." He understood then what the phone call had actually been. Not just about restoring a boat. She'd needed the boat in the hands of someone she could control the information around. Someone small enough to stay off the radar of whoever was watching. "You used the contract," he said. Not accusing, just naming it. "Yes?" She met his eyes. And then it became more than that. A beat. "I'm not apologizing for the first part, but I am telling you the truth about it." He thought about that for a moment. About the alternative. Not knowing, not being here. The Marguerite sitting in the water with her bad keel bolts and her hidden files and no one paying attention. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "That's it? Okay? You were trying to protect something your grandfather built. I get that." He picked up his coffee. "Just don't lie to me going forward." "I haven't lied to you." "I know, don't start." He held her gaze. "We clear?" Something moved in her expression, something he'd seen before and not quite named. "We're clear," she said. They sat for a moment in the quiet of the cabin. Outside, the November water moved against the hull. The yard was empty on a Saturday afternoon, just the two of them, and the files, and the slow work of understanding what had been hidden and why. "My grandfather trusted people easily," Serena said after a while. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at the files. He believed in the best version of people until they showed him something different. He thought it was one of his weaknesses. A pause. "I used to think it was too. I've been the opposite for years. Assume the worst, manage accordingly." She finally looked up. "You're the first person in a long time who made me think that might be costing me something." He didn't have a response to that. He wasn't sure he was supposed to. "Don't tell me to be careful," she said, reading something in his expression. "I know to be careful." "I was going to say I think your grandfather was probably right." She looked at him. The cabin light was low and the afternoon was going gray outside the port lights, and she looked tired and real and nothing like the woman at the center of a glossy magazine profile. She looked like someone who had been holding a heavy thing alone for a long time and was only now, slowly, beginning to put it down. "He would have liked you," she said. "Based on what?" "You fixed his boat." She smiled. A real one, the kind she used rarely and without warning. "And you're honest even when it's inconvenient. That last part gets me in trouble regularly." "I believe it." The afternoon light changed. She gathered her files into their folders with the same methodical care her grandfather had used to store them, and he put the tools away, and they walked out into the cold November dusk together without discussing whether they were going the same direction. They were. Until they weren't, and then they said goodbye on the terminal street, and she went one way and he went another. He drove home with the heater running. He thought about what she'd said about her grandfather, about assuming the best until shown otherwise. He thought about the files below decks on the Marguerite, full of a dead man's careful work, about keel bolts pulled and replaced with the wrong grade, by hands that had known what they were doing, about Carter Roads and 4 months of unanswered requests and a patent filing that was supposedly being compiled. He thought about the way Serena had looked when she said, "I'm not apologizing for the first part." The absolute steadiness of it. The self-awareness. The small, precise offering of honesty that followed. He was not, he understood, falling for someone uncomplicated. He was also not, he was increasingly clear about, falling for someone he could walk away from easily. When he got home, Mia was at the kitchen table again. The sound depth chart from the Marguerite was on the wall above her desk now, pinned carefully with thumbtacks at each corner. "How's the boat?" she said, without looking up from her homework. "Getting better," he said. "How's Serena?" He looked at his daughter. She still wasn't looking up. "Fine," he said. Mm-hmm, Mia said. He went to start dinner. Outside, the Seattle night came in off the water, cold and patient, carrying the smell of the sound and the distant foghorns and everything that was still to come. The storm came in off the Pacific on a Wednesday, which nobody had fully predicted. The National Weather Service had been calling for wind and heavy rain. Standard November coastal weather, the kind Seattle absorbed without much discussion. But what arrived Wednesday night was something with more intention to it. The kind of system that doesn't announce itself until it's already on top of you. The barometric pressure dropping fast enough that Landon felt it as a headache behind his left eye before he checked the weather app and understood what it meant. He called the yard at 6 in the morning and got no answer, so he drove down himself in the dark and spent an hour and a half reinforcing the Marguerite's dock lines and checking the bilge pump and making sure everything below decks was secure. The boat moved restlessly against the dock in a way that felt almost impatient. He stood on the deck in the rain for a moment after he'd done everything useful, looking out at the Sound where the whitecaps were already building in the early light, and he felt that particular thing that comes sometimes when weather is moving. The sensation of something large and indifferent asserting itself over everything small and human. He was back home changing into dry clothes when his phone lit up with Serena's name. "You're awake," he said. "I never slept." Her voice had a different quality to it, tight in a specific way he hadn't heard before. "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I found the patents." He stopped with his shirt half buttoned. "Where?" "In the company system, or rather, what's left of them." A pause that had weight in it. "The original provisional filings are there, but the continuation applications, the ones that would have formalized protection on the core technology, they were abandoned 8 months ago. Someone filed a withdrawal on my grandfather's behalf using his estate authorization. He'd been dead for 2 years by then." "Yes." Another pause. "The authorization was backdated. It was done carefully, careful enough that our own legal team didn't flag it." Landon sat down on the edge of his bed. Outside, the wind was picking up, the first serious gusts moving through the Ballard streets and rattling something loose on the building across the way. Who had estate authorization access? 3 people in the IP department, and Carter Rhodes, who countersigned all estate-related filings in his capacity as CFO. Her voice was controlled, almost too controlled. "I got into the system audit log last night. Someone accessed the filing records from a terminal in the Financial Technology Division. 3 weeks ago." "What's in the Financial Technology Division?" "Carter's direct team." A breath that wasn't quite steady. "And a joint venture partner we've been developing for the past 6 months, a company called Northgate Marine Systems." The name landed the way she'd said it, without drama, which made it worse. "They've been in your building," he said. "They have office access as part of the partnership agreement. Standard arrangement." She stopped. "Landon, the technology my grandfather developed, the passive acoustic survey system, Northgate filed a patent application of their own 9 months ago, 2 weeks after the withdrawal of my grandfather's continuation filing." He was quiet for a moment. The wind pushed at the windows. Down the hall, Mia was still asleep, and the apartment had the particular stillness of a household that doesn't know yet what kind of day it's about to have. "They took it," he said. "They took it. With help from inside my company." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Just barely. Just once. I've been building something for 4 years, Landon. 12-hour days, every decision carrying the weight of 2,000 people's livelihoods, and someone I trusted to protect this company has been selling it from the inside." He didn't say anything immediately. He understood she wasn't asking for comfort. She was saying a true thing out loud to the one person she'd decided she could say it to, and the appropriate response to that was to receive it without trying to fix it. "When did you figure out it was Rhodes?" he said. "I've suspected for 3 months. The patent access log is the first thing I have that puts his name on paper." She exhaled. "I called my attorney an hour ago. She says without more documentation, Rhodes could argue the backdated filing was a procedural error. Estate authorization is complex enough that it could be made to look like confusion rather than fraud. What would more documentation look like? Original research files, time-stamped, proving the technology was developed by my grandfather at Vail Marine, not independently by Northgate. A pause. Files like the ones currently in a drawer on the Marguerite. He understood. The hard drive, he said. The one in the forward cabin. I haven't opened it yet. I needed to know what we were dealing with before I opened it. Her voice steadied. I think we need to open it. The storm's going to be bad today. The yard might not be accessible. I know. Can you get there? He thought about the dock lines he'd reinforced at 6 in the morning, the bilge pump he'd checked, the Marguerite moving against her fenders in the early swells. I can get there. Give me an hour. I'll meet you. Serena. He stopped her before she could end the call. Who else knows about the patent audit log? A silence that told him she'd already thought about this. As of last night, me and whoever has been monitoring my system access. Another beat. Which means we need to move today before they know I found it. He hung up and sat for a moment on the edge of his bed, listening to the wind working itself up outside. Then he went and knocked on Mia's door. She appeared in the doorway in approximately 30 seconds, which meant she'd been awake already, reading under her covers the way she always was when she thought he didn't know. She took one look at him and said, "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I need to go to the yard. Mrs. Chen downstairs can—" "I'll come." "Mia, it's storming." "I know. I've been listening to it." She was already reaching for her jacket. "I'll stay in the truck. I'm not going to melt." He started to object and then looked at his daughter in her rubber boots and her green jacket with the chart-covered wall behind her, and he thought about 8 years of figuring it out alone together, the two of them, and he didn't have the energy for the argument, and also she was usually right. "Truck," he said. "You stay in the truck." "Obviously," she said. The drive to the yard was slow. The rain was coming sideways by the time they crossed into Shilshole, and the streets were running with water that had overwhelmed the drains. He parked as close to the dock gate as he could manage and left the engine running for Mia with the heater on high, and she'd already pulled a book from somewhere and was reading it with the self-contained patience of a child who has spent her whole life around working adults. Serena arrived 4 minutes later in a car that had someone else driving, which he registered and didn't comment on. She came down the dock in the rain without an umbrella, her coat already darkened with water across the shoulders, and he held the gate for her and they walked the length of the dock with the wind at their backs. The Marguerite was working against her dock lines in a way that wasn't dangerous but was insistent. He steadied her with a hand on the stern rail and helped Serena aboard, and then they were below decks in the relative quiet of the cabin, where the storm sounds were muffled and the water drummed against the hull in a way that felt both threatening and somehow close. The forward cabin was where Landon had been running new electrical. He'd moved around the drawers of files carefully in the past weeks, worked around them, not opened them. The hard drive was exactly where he'd first noticed it, in a protective case in the bottom drawer of the main workstation, surrounded by what appeared to be backup drives in individual sleeves, each one labeled in the same compact handwriting as the notebooks. Serena sat down in front of the workstation and put the hard drive on the table. She looked at it for a moment without touching it. "If it's what I think it is," she said, "then this changes everything. And if it's not, then we're sitting in a boat in a storm with nothing." She looked up at him. "But he kept it here. He kept it on the boat, not in the company servers, not at the house. Here." She pressed her palm flat on the table next to the drive. He knew something was wrong. He was protecting it. She plugged the drive into her laptop. It required a password, which she tried twice unsuccessfully, and then sat back and thought. Landon watched her face work through something. "His wife's name," he said. She looked at him. "Marguerite? Try it." She typed it. The drive opened. The silence in the cabin was different for a moment, both of them understanding what that meant. That a man who knew he was dying had protected his work with the name of the woman he'd lost and the boat he'd named after her. The small, human logic of it. Serena scrolled through the directory without speaking. Landon came to look over her shoulder. The folder structure was dense and methodical. Research logs organized by date going back 6 years, technical files with version histories, and then, in a folder labeled simply Correspondence, a set of documents that were not research files at all. She opened it. The emails were between Victor Vale and someone identified only as an internal company address, an address that Serena stared at for a long moment before she said, very quietly, "That's Carter's personal assistant's account." "What do the emails say?" She read in silence for a minute, 2 minutes. Her face didn't change, but her breathing changed, and Landon had learned to read that. "My grandfather knew," she said. "He knew 8 months before he died that someone in the company was passing information to Northgate. He was documenting it." She scrolled further. "He hired a private investigator. There are copies of reports here." She clicked on a file and a scanned document opened. A PI's report with dates and surveillance photographs and a name. Carter Rhodes and the CEO of Northgate Marine Systems met 4 times in 6 months. 2 of those meetings were at a private club in Bellevue. She kept reading. "My grandfather sent a letter to the board, requesting an emergency session. Did they respond?" Her voice went very flat. "They responded by recommending he take medical leave due to his illness." The storm hit the hull with a particular gust then, something bigger moving through, and the Marguerite shifted against her dock lines with a kind of complaint. The cabin lights flickered once. "He tried to stop it," Landon said, "and they used his dying against him." She closed the laptop. Her hands on the case were not quite steady. "They waited until he was too sick to fight back, and then they buried it." She was quiet for a moment. "He didn't get to finish. He was going to come back here, take the Marguerite out, do one more survey run to complete his data set, and then go to the board with everything." A pause. "He never made the survey run." "Because he got too sick." "Because he got too sick." She looked at the laptop. "And then someone made sure the boat couldn't go back in the water anyway." The rain came down harder. Somewhere on the dock above them, something was knocking loose in the wind, a rhythmic impact against the metal railing that started and started again. Landon looked at the directory still visible on the screen. "There's more in here," he said. "I know. We need to get copies of everything. Today, not tomorrow." "I know." She opened the laptop again. Her voice was steady now, with the particular steadiness of someone who has passed through the worst of something and come out the other side into clarity. "I need to call my attorney, and I need to do it without using the company network." She looked at him. "Can I use your phone?" He handed it to her. She stepped toward the aft cabin for privacy, and he heard her voice, low and controlled, for the next 10 minutes, while he copied the hard drive onto every backup drive he had in his tool bag. He copied it 3 times on 3 different drives, and put 2 of them in his jacket pockets, and gave her the 3rd when she came back. "My attorney is contacting a federal securities fraud investigator she works with," Serena said. "There's a meeting tomorrow morning." She held the drive. "If what's on here is what it appears to be, the documented evidence of patent fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, this goes well beyond a civil dispute. What happens to Rhodes? That depends on how far it goes." She looked at the drive in her hand. "But I guess he's been aware this was a possibility, which means—" Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her expression changed. "It's my VP of operations," she said. "Hold on." She answered it. He watched her face while she listened. Whatever she was being told arrived in stages, each one shifting something in her expression. Not fear exactly, more like the specific alertness of someone watching a wall they'd been watching for a long time finally begin to fall. "When?" she said. And then, "Who called the meeting?" And then nothing, just listening, for almost a full minute. She hung up. She looked at the hard drive in her hand and then at Landon. "Rhodes moved this morning," she said, "while the storm was going. He called an emergency board session for tomorrow afternoon. He's presenting a resolution to remove me as CEO pending an internal audit." She paused. "The audit is based on allegations that I've been misusing company resources, personal projects, unauthorized use of company systems. He found out you accessed the patent logs." "He found out I accessed the patent logs." She looked at him with the particular expression of someone recalculating, at speed. "He's been watching me watch him, and he decided to move first." "Can he get the votes?" "He has 4 board members who've been aligned with the restructuring push. I have 3 I'm sure of. There are 2 who I thought were neutral." She was thinking out loud now, not performing certainty she didn't have. "If he's convinced the neutrals, he can call it." The storm worked at the hull, the cabin lights held. Outside, the sound was gray and enormous under the moving sky, and somewhere in a Bellevue office or a downtown conference room, a man who had spent years carefully building a position to take something that wasn't his was making phone calls. "There's a board vote tomorrow," Landon said, "and a federal investigator meeting tomorrow morning." "Yes." "And what's on this drive is what you'd need to stop the vote." "It's what I'd need to stop the vote." She looked at him steadily. "But I need to authenticate it. A hard drive isn't enough on its own. Rhodes will argue it was fabricated. I need the physical research files to corroborate the dates on the digital records. Chain of custody. Something that demonstrates this material was here, on this boat, protected and untouched, before I had any reason to fabricate it." Landon thought about the drawers of files in the forward cabin, the notebooks in the precise handwriting, the PI reports, dated and signed. "The physical files haven't been touched," he said. "We've worked around them for 6 weeks. My crew can testify to that. The yard has security cameras that have been running since she was hauled out." Something moved in her face. "That's actually—" She stopped. "That's actually good." "I know it's good. That's why I said it." She looked at him. There was something in that look that she didn't try to make into anything useful or professional. It was just there, the unguarded version of everything she normally kept carefully managed. "Landon?" "Yeah." "Thank you." She said it the way people say things when they mean more than the words, when the words are just the surface of something larger that they don't have the architecture to say directly. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We still have a board vote tomorrow." "I know." She straightened. The unguarded thing went back where it lived. "I need to make calls. I need to talk to my 3 certain board members tonight before Rhodes gets to them in the morning. And I need to figure out how to get the physical files out of this boat without destroying the chain of custody. Your attorney can advise on the chain of custody. I can move the files under documented conditions, witness present, photographs, logged inventory." He paused. "But I want someone from your legal team here when we do it, in person, not on a phone." "I can have someone here by tonight." "Then we do it tonight, before the storm gets worse." He looked at the forward cabin. "Serena, there's something else on that drive." She had been reaching for her phone. She stopped. "What?" "Third folder down in the main directory. I saw it when I was copying. It's labeled Board Correspondence. I didn't open it, but I saw the file count." He looked at her. 37 files. Your grandfather had been documenting the board's response to his complaints for months." She looked at the laptop, then at him. 37. 37. She opened it. The first file was an email chain. The second was a letter on company letterhead. The third was a set of meeting minutes that had the word confidential across the top in red, dated 14 months before Victor Vale's death. She read. Landon did not read over her shoulder this time. He sat down across from her and let her read. She read for a long time. The storm moved over them and past them and came back. The bilge pump cycled twice. At some point, Landon went up on deck to check the dock lines and came back below dripping rain, and she was still reading, her face a careful blank that he knew by now meant she was holding something that cost her something. When she finally closed the laptop, she didn't speak for a moment. "They knew," she said. "The full board. Not just the 4 aligned with Rhodes, all of them. My grandfather told them everything he had, and they voted 7-2 to table the matter pending further review." She looked at the wall of the cabin. "And then they never reviewed it. They just waited for him to die." The wind outside was a low, continuous sound now, the storm having settled into itself. The Marguerite moved patiently against her lines. 2 voted against tabling it, Landon said. 2. Who? She named them. He didn't know the names, but he registered the way she said them, with the particular weight of people who had been right when it cost something to be right. "They're your 3 certain votes," he said. 2 of them are." She looked at the laptop. "The third one came on the board after my grandfather died. She has no reason to be loyal to his legacy. But she has every reason to want the person committing fraud removed." Serena looked at him. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "You think in straight lines. I think in boat problems. The solution is usually the direct one that you've been avoiding because it seems too simple." She sat back. The tension in her shoulders was still there, but it had changed character. Less the tension of someone who doesn't know what's happening, and more the tension of someone who knows exactly what's happening and is preparing for it. I need to call Margaret Cho. She's the third vote. A pause. She's also the one Rhodes has been trying to cultivate for 2 months. Call her before he does. I was going to. She stood up, put the laptop under her arm, tucked the hard drive in her coat pocket. She looked around the cabin once, at the files in the forward drawers, the notebooks, the barometer Mia had found on her first visit, the physical evidence of a man who had tried and hadn't quite made it in time. He should have had more time, she said quietly. Not to Landon specifically, just to the air of the cabin. He ran out, Landon said, but he kept the records. He knew someone would come looking. She looked at him. He couldn't have known it would be me. He left it for someone who'd care. You cared. A beat. He knew you well enough to build the lock and the key. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she moved toward the companionway ladder, and he followed her up into the rain. On deck, the storm was something physical. Wind that pushed at them as they crossed to the dock, the rain coming hard and cold and horizontal. He helped her off the boarding ramp, and they stood for a moment on the dock with the weather moving around them. She turned. She was close enough that he could see the rain on her face and the steadiness in her eyes, and whatever she was carrying and refusing to put down. Tomorrow might not go well, she said. It might not. Even with everything on that drive. I know. She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. Then she said, Don't let Mia wait in that truck too much longer. She'll start reorganizing your glove compartment. He almost laughed. She already organized my entire tool bag last Thursday. Good. She turned and walked up the dock into the rain, her coat dark with water, her hand in her pocket around the hard drive that held everything. He watched her until she reached the gate. Then he turned back to the Marguerite, checked the dock lines one final time, the bow line, the stern line, the 2 spring lines he'd added that morning, and stood for a moment on the dock with the storm moving around him. The boat held, the lines held, everything was still where it needed to be. He went back to the truck. Mia was not reading her book. She was watching the dock gate. When she saw him coming, she turned forward and picked up her book with the specific casualness of someone who had absolutely not been watching. How's the boat? She said. Secure. How's Serena? He got in the truck. He sat for a moment with the rain on the windshield and the heater running and his daughter beside him pretending to read her book. She's going to be okay, he said. Mia turned a page she hadn't read. Are you sure? He thought about the hard drive in a pocket. 37 files, a dead man's careful record of everything that had been done to what he built. The specific patient preparation of someone who believed someone else would come looking. Yeah, he said. I'm pretty sure. He started the truck. Outside, the storm moved over Seattle the way storms do, without caring, without hurry, following its own logic entirely. The sound was somewhere behind the rain, dark and cold and exactly what it had always been. They drove home through the weather, and Mia eventually put the book down and watched the rain on the windows, and neither of them said anything else because there wasn't anything else that needed to be said. The storm broke sometime before dawn, and by morning Seattle had that particular washed quality it gets after serious weather. The air cold and clean, the streets still running with water in the gutters, the sky a flat gray that was different from the storm gray, quieter, like something that had said its piece and was done talking. Landon was already at his attorney's office by 7:15. Not his attorney, Serena's attorney, a woman named Patricia Owens who ran a 3-person firm out of a narrow building in Pioneer Square and who had, in Landon's estimate, more controlled fury packed into a 5'2" frame than anyone he'd encountered. She'd been up since 4. The conference table was covered in printed documents, hard copies of everything from the drive, organized in a way that suggested she'd developed her own system and wasn't interested in discussing it. The chain of custody on the physical files is solid, Patricia said, without looking up from what she was reading. Yard security footage, your crew's testimony, the haul-out log. Defense will try to argue the digital files are fabricated, but they can't touch the physical notebooks. She turned a page. The PI reports are the strongest element. Victor Vale hired a licensed investigator. The reports are signed and notarized. The dates predate any conceivable motive for fabrication by 18 months. Can we get it in front of the board today? Serena said. She was across the table from Landon, coffee untouched in front of her, the particular stillness of someone who had slept a combined 3 hours and was running on something harder than caffeine. We can try. What we cannot do is walk into that boardroom and make criminal allegations without the federal investigators present, because it gives Rhodes grounds to call the whole proceeding improper. Patricia finally looked up. Agent Reyes from the Securities Division confirmed this morning. She can be at the building by 2. The board meeting is scheduled for 3. Rhodes scheduled it at 3, Serena said. He controls the agenda. You're going to request an emergency addendum to the agenda. As sitting CEO, you have the right to present material relevant to company governance before any removal vote. Patricia set down the document she was holding. He'll try to object. Your 2 reliable votes need to second the addendum request before he can shut it down. I spoke to both of them last night. They'll second it. She paused. Margaret Cho is the question. Did you reach her? I reached her at 9:30 last night. We talked for 40 minutes. Serena turned her coffee cup without drinking from it. She didn't commit. She said she needed to see documentation. She'll see documentation. Patricia gathered a set of papers and slid them across the table toward Serena. This is the summary package. PI reports, audit log showing the unauthorized patent access, the timeline of the withdrawal filing matched against the dates of the Rhodes-Northgate meetings. She paused. And this. She slid a single sheet separately. This is the board minutes from 14 months before Victor Vale's death, the meeting where they voted to table his complaint. Margaret Cho was not on the board at that time. She was appointed after he died. Serena looked at the sheet. She had no idea. She had no idea the board she joined had already sat on documented evidence of fraud. Patricia said it flatly. When she finds out, she's going to have a very direct choice between being the person who helped cover it up or the person who helped end it. Landon had been quiet for most of this, taking in the shape of it. He understood legal proceedings the way he understood electrical systems, not in their specific language, but in their basic logic. What was connected to what? Where the load was actually going? What happens to the vote if Cho abstains, he said. Patricia looked at him. She'd been doing that periodically, noting him, recalibrating. He had the impression she didn't often find clients who brought someone like him into a meeting like this, and she wasn't sure yet what to do with him. An abstention gives Rhodes the majority. He has 4 committed votes, Serena has 3. If Cho sits out, it's 4-3, and Serena is removed pending audit. What does the audit do? It freezes her operational authority while the board appoints an interim CEO. Patricia's voice was even. The interim CEO would almost certainly be someone aligned with Rhodes, and the first thing that interim CEO would do is invoke the authority to settle the Northgate dispute in a manner that legitimizes the patent transfer, Serena said. Yes. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car went by on the wet street, its tires loud against the standing water. The conference table held its document landscape. Landon looked at Serena, and she was looking at the table with an expression he recognized, the expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head that keeps coming out wrong. There's one more thing, Serena said. She reached into her bag and produced a folder he hadn't seen before. I found it at 2 a.m, in the board correspondence folder on the drive. She opened it. My grandfather's letter, the one he sent requesting the emergency board session, not the official one that got tabled, the second one, written 2 weeks after the first was dismissed. She slid it across to Patricia. Patricia read it. Landon watched Patricia's face, which was professionally controlled and still managed to convey something. He addressed it to the full board, Patricia said, and CC'd the company's external auditor and the State Securities Division. Serena's voice was level. It was never sent. I think he got too sick before he could send it. He kept the draft here because he was going to send it from the Marguerite, from the satellite connection, after he completed the survey run. She looked at the letter. He never made the survey run? But the draft exists, Patricia said, time-stamped in the file metadata. And the external auditor on that CC line, Serena said, is the same firm that still handles our annual audit. which means they have a duty to report obligation if they're presented with evidence that a reportable event occurred that they should have been informed of. Patricia sat back in her chair. She looked at Serena with the expression of someone reassessing something they thought they'd fully assessed. You've been working toward this argument all night. Since about 1 in the morning, Serena finally picked up her coffee, found it cold, set it down again. I kept thinking about what Landon said on the boat. The direct solution you've been avoiding because it seems too simple. She glanced at him. The external auditor changes everything. Rhodes can argue the board vote is legitimate corporate governance. He can't argue away a duty to report obligation that his own fraud triggered. It puts the auditors in the room, Landon said. It puts the auditors in the room, Patricia confirmed, voluntarily or otherwise. She was already reaching for her phone. I need to make 3 calls, starting with the auditing firm. She stood. Give me 45 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Don't call anyone you haven't already called. She looked at Landon specifically. That includes you. She went into the next room and closed the door. Serena and Landon were left alone at the conference table with the document landscape and the cold coffee and the gray Seattle morning pressing against the windows. You look like you need sleep, he said. I need this to be over. She rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand, a gesture so unguarded it almost felt private. Do you know what the worst part of the last 2 years has been? It wasn't the board politics, it wasn't the investor pressure. It was walking into that building every morning knowing something was wrong and not being able to name it. Feeling like the walls were tilting and being told by everyone around me that the building was fine. Your grandfather felt that too. He did, and he was right, and they ran the clock out on him. She dropped her hand. I keep thinking, if he'd had 1 more month, if the diagnosis had come 6 months later, if someone had been paying attention to what was happening to the Marguerite while he was sick. She looked at the window. He did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. He kept the files. That was enough. It just took longer than he expected for someone to find them. She was quiet for a moment. You found them. You hired me to fix his boat. He looked at her. He built the lock. You held the key. You just needed someone to get the door open. She looked at him with the unguarded thing again, the one that lived underneath all the competence and the controlled presentation and the 4 years of hard decisions. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been at that gala. Grab someone else's tray, he said. She almost laughed. Almost. The almost laugh was still one of his favorite things about her, and he was aware this was probably important information about himself. When this is over, she said, I'm going to need about 3 days where nobody needs anything from me. Mia and I know a place on the coast. Nothing there except a gas station and a view of the water. She looked at him. Is that an invitation? Depends how today goes. And if it goes well? Then, yeah, he said. It's an invitation. She looked at the window again. The morning light was changing, the flat gray giving way to something thinner and colder. Okay, she said quietly. Not a performance, not a negotiation. Just a word that meant yes. Months. Patricia came back in 38 minutes, which was faster than she'd estimated, which in Landon's experience meant either very good news or the kind of very bad news that resolved itself quickly. He read her face when she came in the door and downgraded to cautiously good. The auditing firm's managing partner, Patricia said, sitting down, has been carrying this for 18 months. He received an anonymous tip, which we now know was probably from your grandfather's PI, covering his tracks, about irregularities in the patent filing process. He opened an internal review, closed it without finding anything actionable because he didn't have the underlying documentation. She looked at Serena. He has been waiting for someone to give him grounds to reopen it. Serena let out a breath. One careful breath. Agent Reyes is moving the meeting to noon, Patricia continued. The federal investigators want to be present at the board meeting, not just nearby. That changes the procedural ground completely. Rhodes can't call the meeting improper if a federal investigation is already underway. She straightened her papers. I need you at the Vail Marine Building by 11:30. What do I tell my assistant? Tell her you have a governance matter to address. Nothing else." Patricia looked between them. "Landon, you're coming too. The physical files need to be transported under witness. You're the primary witness to the chain of custody." He'd expected this. He'd called Denny at 6 in the morning and told him to run the shop without him today, which Denny had received with the equanimity of a man who has seen enough Tuesdays to know that sometimes the Tuesday requires something outside normal operations. He'd also, before leaving home, sat on the edge of Mia's bed while she was eating breakfast and told her he might be late tonight. "How late?" she'd said. "Don't know yet." She'd looked at him with the evaluating expression. "Is Serena going to be okay?" "That's the plan. Okay?" She'd gone back to her cereal. "Tell her I said good luck." He told her. The Vail Marine Technologies building was on the waterfront, which struck Landon as appropriate. A glass and steel structure that faced the sound directly, 12 stories of maritime technology company with its history visible in the view from every office window. He'd driven past it 100 times. He'd never had reason to go inside. The lobby was exactly what he'd expected, and nothing like the Meridian Club and nothing like the Marguerite, and he understood standing in it why Serena kept her grandfather's boat as carefully as she had. It was the only place in her professional life that wasn't performing something. Patricia moved them through the lobby with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been in a lot of lobbies that didn't want to let her in. They went up to the 10th floor, into a conference room that was not the boardroom, a smaller space that Serena's assistant had arranged without being told why it was needed. Agent Reyes and a second investigator were already there when they arrived. The managing partner from the auditing firm came in 6 minutes later, slightly out of breath, carrying a briefcase that suggested he'd pulled it from somewhere fast. The next 2 hours were the kind of procedural and not very dramatic. Documents were reviewed by people whose professional function was to review documents. Questions were asked and answered. Landon laid out the chain of custody for the physical files with the same precision he'd used to document a hull repair. Dates, conditions, witnesses, security footage timestamps. Patricia translated everything into the language that federal investigators and auditors required it to be in. Serena sat through most of it with a stillness that he'd come to understand was how she processed things under pressure. Not absence, presence turned entirely inward, running its own calculations. At 1:15, Agent Reyes looked across the table and said, "Ms. Vail, what we have here is sufficient to open a formal investigation. That investigation will take time. What happens in the boardroom at 3 o'clock is a separate matter. We can be present, but we cannot intervene in a corporate governance proceeding unless criminal activity is actively ongoing." She paused. "What I can tell you is that Mr. Rhodes and 2 members of his team will be receiving formal notifications this afternoon. Timing is at our discretion." Serena understood. "Before 3 o'clock. "The timing is at our discretion," Agent Reyes said again, with the careful emphasis of a person saying something twice because the second time has a different weight. The boardroom was on the 12th floor, all glass on the water side, the sound enormous and gray-green through the windows. When Landon walked in at 2:55 behind Serena and Patricia, there were already 9 people at the table, the full board, which meant Rhodes had made sure everyone was present. He wanted witnesses for the removal. He'd get them. Rhodes was at the far end of the table, and Landon had built a picture of him from Serena's descriptions and from the PI photographs on the hard drive. But the actual man was slightly different from the assembled version, younger looking than he'd expected, early 50s, with the particular well-maintained appearance of someone who had always believed his presentation was his most important asset. He looked up when Serena came in. He looked at Landon. Something calculated moved behind his eyes and was gone. Serena took her seat at the head of the table without hesitation, and Patricia and Landon took the chairs along the side wall that the board assistant had set for observers. There were 3 other observers already in the room, 2 men in suits that Landon couldn't place, and Margaret Cho, who was not at the main table. Cho was 40-something, dark-haired, with the expression of someone who had arrived having made a decision and was waiting to execute it. She caught Serena's eye across the room. Something passed between them that Landon couldn't fully read. Gerald Marsh, the silver-haired investor from the gala, who apparently had gotten closer to the board than Serena had mentioned, was at the far right of the table and had the appearance of someone who'd known this meeting was coming for weeks. He probably had. Rhodes called the meeting to order. He was smooth about it, the right procedural language, the right tone, the careful confidence of someone who has done the math and believes he knows the outcome. He outlined the motion, a vote to remove Serena Vale as CEO of Vale Marine Technologies, pending an internal audit into misuse of company resources and systems. Serena requested the floor for a governance addendum before the vote. Rhodes objected. One of his 4 board allies seconded the objection. The room held its breath. Margaret Cho said clearly from her seat along the wall, "I move to allow the addendum." The 2 board members Serena had spoken to last night seconded it before Rhodes could reformulate his objection. The chair, an older man named Whitfield who'd been with the board since Victor Vale's time, and who Landon had the impression was quietly exhausted by all of it, recognized the motion. 3-2. The addendum was allowed. Serena stood up. She was the only person standing in the room. The sound was behind her through the window, and the light was flat and cold, and she looked like someone who had been heading toward this moment for a long time and had stopped being afraid of it somewhere around 2 in the morning. She didn't use notes. She told Patricia she wasn't going to use notes, and Patricia had told her that was against her advice, and Serena had said she understood. She started with her grandfather. Not with the legal argument, not with the evidence. With Victor Vale, who had built this company from 42 people, and a belief that the ocean was worth understanding better than we currently did, and who had spent the last 2 years of his life documenting what was being done to what he'd built, because he wanted someone to be able to finish what he'd started. She wasn't performing grief. She wasn't using it as a device. She was just telling the truth about a man who had deserved better from the people in this room. And the room felt that, even the people in it who didn't want to. Then she laid out the evidence, methodically, in order, the way Patricia had prepared her to do it. The patent withdrawal and its backdated authorization, the audit log and the terminal access, the PI reports, the board minutes from 14 months before Victor's death, which she described in enough detail that everyone in the room who had been at that meeting felt the specific weight of it. The 37 files. She did not name Rhodes during any of this. She named the actions and the documents and the dates. Rhodes held it together through most of it. Landon was watching him the way he watched a structural problem, looking for where the stress was concentrating. It concentrated visibly when Serena mentioned the external auditor and the draft letter. Rhodes looked for the first time like someone who had miscalculated the terrain. Then the door opened. Agent Reyes walked in, followed by her colleague. They carried nothing dramatic, no handcuffs, no theater, just 2 people in professional clothes who represented something that couldn't be argued with procedurally. "Mr. Rhodes," Agent Reyes said from the doorway. "I'm Agent Dana Reyes, Securities Fraud Division. You and Mr. Garrison," she looked at the man to Rhodes's right, one of his allied board members, "are being formally notified that you are subjects of an active federal investigation. I'd ask that you both remain available to speak with us following this meeting." The room was completely still. Rhodes looked at Agent Reyes. He looked at Serena. He looked at Landon, which was interesting because Landon was nobody in this room in any formal sense, just a man sitting in a chair along the side wall who fixed old boats for a living. Whatever Rhodes saw when he looked at him, his face didn't give anything back. He said to his attorney, who materialized from somewhere near the door, "Don't say anything." Then he sat back in his chair and became very still and very quiet, and stayed that way. The vote, when it happened, was not close. Serena's 3 went immediately. Margaret Cho voted with her, looking at Rhodes with an expression that was somewhere between fury and something more complicated. Whitfield, the chair, voted with Serena, and then 2 of Rhodes's other allies looked at each other and at Agent Reyes standing in the doorway, and voted with Serena as well. 6-2. The motion to remove failed. Whitfield adjourned the meeting with the brisk efficiency of a man who wanted to be somewhere else and understood he was going to be answering questions for the next several weeks, regardless. The hallway outside the boardroom was not a place for celebration, which was fine because nobody felt like celebrating. Serena stood in the hallway with Patricia, and she looked more tired than Landon had ever seen her. The specific exhaustion that comes after something you've been bracing for is finally over and your body suddenly has nowhere to put all the tension it's been holding. Margaret Cho came out and stopped in front of Serena. She was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know," she said, that I had no knowledge of the 2019 board action. I know, Serena said. I know, Serena said again. Something in her voice closed the sentence gently. Thank you for today. Cho nodded. She looked like she had more to say and decided it could wait. She walked toward the elevator. Landon was leaning against the hallway wall, out of the way of the post-meeting dispersal. Patricia was on her phone already, which would probably continue for the foreseeable future. Serena came to stand beside him. 6-2, she said. Yeah. Whitfield, she said. I didn't expect Whitfield. He's been there since your grandfather. He was waiting for someone to give him permission to do the right thing. She looked at the window at the end of the hallway. The sound was visible from here, too. It was visible from most of the building, which was clearly intentional, a man keeping what mattered in his eye line at all times. He would have liked seeing this room today, she said. Yeah, Landon said. I think he would have. She leaned against the wall beside him. They stood there in the hallway while the board dispersal continued around them, people moving past with the particular urgency of individuals who needed to make calls and have conversations in private before the news hit whatever channels it was about to hit. Rhodes had been escorted to a separate room by Agent Reyes and his attorney, and the door was closed. That gas station on the coast, Serena said after a while. What about it? Is the view actually good, or is that the kind of thing people say about places because they feel obligated? The view's good. I've gone there 3 times and never gotten tired of it. She was quiet for a moment. When can we go? He thought about it. About the Marguerite, which still needed another 6 to 8 weeks of work to be fully operational. About Denny and Daniel and Kira, who would have questions about today that he'd have to answer carefully. About Mia, who was at school right now, probably half concentrating on whatever her class was doing and half thinking about the depth chart on her wall. Weekend after next, he said, if everything holds. If everything holds, she agreed. She was still leaning against the wall. So was he. Their shoulders were almost touching. Neither of them moved away. Landon, she said. Yeah. That joke you made at the gala. She looked at him sideways. About whoever stayed by my side being lucky. I remember. You laughed. She said it without accusation, just fact. I know. Are you still laughing? He thought about the dock in the morning storm, the hard drive in his jacket pocket, the borrowed tray in his hand at a party where he didn't belong, the Marguerite waiting in the yard for the next piece of her restoration, patient as the water she was built for. No, he said. I'm not laughing. She looked at the window. The sound was there, the way it always was. Patient and indifferent and real, and he'd come to believe genuinely the most honest thing about this city. Good, she said. The months after the boardroom did not unfold cleanly. That was the first thing Landon learned about the aftermath of something like this. You expect it to resolve the way a storm resolves, dramatically and then completely, the sky clearing all at once. What actually happened was more like the way a boat dries out after serious water damage, slowly, in layers, some sections faster than others, and you keep finding wet spots you thought were dry. Carter Rhodes and his colleague Garrison were formally charged 6 weeks after the board meeting. The charges were securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to misappropriate intellectual property, the last charge carrying the most weight because the evidence from the Marguerite's hard drive was time-stamped, authenticated, and corroborated by the PI reports in ways that made the defense's position genuinely difficult. Landon read about it in the morning news the same way he read about weather systems, with professional attention and a certain distance, the knowledge that this particular storm had already passed over him, and what he was reading now was the cleanup. Northgate Marine Systems settled out of court in March. The settlement terms were sealed, but Patricia Owens told Serena in a phone call that Landon was present for that the number was large enough to fund the entire research division for 3 years. The patent filings were restored in Vail Marine's name, with the external auditor's firm handling the documentation, which had the particular satisfaction of the right tool applied to the right problem. The Marguerite was fully restored and back in the water by February. 6 months of work instead of the 8 Landon had initially projected, which was the one part of this entire story that had come in ahead of schedule. He'd launched her on a gray February morning with Serena standing on the dock watching, and Denny beside him being professionally understated about what a piece of work the old girl had become. The teak was new on the forward section and matched almost perfectly to the surviving original aft. Not perfectly, because nothing ever matched perfectly when you were mixing old wood with new, but close enough that you had to know where to look. The hull was solid, the keel bolts were the correct grade, and torqued to spec, and would outlast everyone in the vicinity. The electrical system was clean and properly run for the first time in probably 15 years. The Volvo diesel had turned out to be savable, which Landon had been skeptical about and Denny had been right about, which Denny had mentioned twice. When Serena stepped aboard for the first time since they'd hauled her out, she'd gone below decks alone and stayed there for about 10 minutes. Nobody had made any move to follow her or comment on it. She'd come back up with the expression of someone who had set something down that they'd been carrying a long time. Not empty, lighter. The specific quality of grief that has been properly honored and can now, without dishonoring anything, begin to recede. "She's good," Serena had said, which covered everything she meant and more than she had words for, and Landon had said, "Yeah, she is," and they'd left it there. That weekend, they'd taken her out for the first time. Just the four of them. Landon, Serena, Mia, and Denny, who had declared himself essential on the basis that someone needed to watch the engine on a maiden run, and he was the person who knew where all the work was. The Sound had been cold and silver under a February sky, the kind of day that was all gray and water, and the particular pleasure of being somewhere that doesn't care about your problems. Mia had stationed herself at the bow with both hands on the rail and her face into the wind with the specific ecstasy of a child encountering something she's been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. Denny, in the cockpit, watching Mia at the bow, had said to nobody in particular, "That's a good kid." Serena, standing beside Landon at the helm, had said quietly, "She really is." And Landon had not said anything at all, because the moment didn't need anything added to it. The coast trip happened in late February, a Saturday and Sunday. The gas station and a view of the water place south of Aberdeen that Landon had been going to for years. They drove out in his truck, Mia between them arguing gently about which radio station, until all three of them ended up listening to a news program nobody had chosen because they'd been too busy arguing to notice the channel had changed. Mia fell asleep somewhere past Olympia with her head against the window and the depth chart from the Marguerite folded in her jacket pocket because she carried it everywhere now, the way kids carry the objects they've decided matter. The cabin they rented was nothing. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a deck facing the ocean with 2 plastic chairs that had been there since approximately the previous decade. The gas station across the highway sold decent coffee and bad sandwiches, which they bought and ate on the deck anyway, because the view made everything taste better than it was. The Pacific was different from the Sound. Bigger, louder, less interested in being beautiful, and more interested in simply being large. They sat on the deck in their coats and watched the water and didn't talk much, which had become something they were both good at, the specific ease of people who have stopped needing noise to fill the space between them. Mia found a tide pool the next morning and spent 2 hours crouched over it with the focused intensity of a scientist, calling them over periodically to look at a hermit crab, or a sea anemone with the evangelical urgency of someone who has discovered something and cannot believe other people are not as excited about it as they should be. Driving home Sunday afternoon, Mia asleep again in the back seat now that she'd negotiated more space, Serena looked out at the highway and said, "I want to do that survey run. The one your grandfather was planning. The one he never made." She looked at the passing landscape. "The research is all there. The equipment he was developing, we can build it. The team in the research division has been going through his notes for 2 months, and they're genuinely excited about it. His instincts were right." A pause. "I want to take the Marguerite out and complete his data set." "When?" "Spring, when the weather settles." She looked at him. "I want you there." "I'm not a researcher." "No, but you're the person who knows that boat better than anyone alive." She held his gaze. "And you're the person I want there." He drove for a moment. The highway was mostly empty in the Sunday afternoon, the tall firs on either side dark green against the gray sky. "Okay," he said. "Okay." She looked back at the highway. "And Mia?" She looked at him. "She's coming," he said. "Non-negotiable." Serena smiled at the windshield. "I assumed," she said. Spring came slowly to Seattle the way it always did. Not all at once, but in accumulation, small warmings that added up to something. By April, the days were longer and the water was still cold, but had stopped feeling punishing, and the research division at Vail Marine had put together a survey plan that built on Victor Vail's original framework with 6 months of additional thinking behind it. The technology they were developing, the passive acoustic survey system he designed from first principles, was, as it turned out, genuinely extraordinary. The kind of thing that got people in the industry paying attention. There had been a piece in a maritime technology journal in March, a conference presentation in April, 2 inquiries from research institutions about potential collaboration. None of which Serena talked about much, because she'd learned from her grandfather that the best way to protect something is to build it before you announce it. Landon had other things to think about. The shop had changed. The Marguerite project had generated, through some combination of the work itself and the company it had kept, 3 new contracts in the first quarter of the year. Not large, but steadier than anything he'd had in 2 years. And one of them was for a wooden-hulled research vessel belonging to a university environmental program, which was the kind of work he was good at and had stopped expecting to find. He hired a 5th person, a young woman named Rosa, who'd trained as a marine carpenter and was better at composite work than either Daniel or Kira, and knew it in a way that was more useful than aggravating. The overdraft line hadn't been touched since December. Denny, who kept his own counsel about most things, told him one morning in March, while they were both working on the university boat, "You look different." "Different how?" Landon said, without stopping what he was doing. "Less like someone trying to outrun something," Denny said, and went back to work. Landon didn't say anything to that. He thought about it for a few days before he decided Denny was right, and then he thought about what had changed, and the thinking wasn't complicated. Some things just needed to be named honestly. The survey run happened in late April, a Thursday through Sunday when the weather window opened cleanly enough to make it possible. Mia's teacher had been understanding about a 3-day school absence when presented with the argument that her student was participating in a real marine research expedition, which was educational by definition. Mia had prepared for this by making a list of questions she intended to answer during the trip, which included things like, how do the fish know where to go, and what does quiet sound like underwater, and is the data collection automatic or does someone have to listen, all of which were better questions than Landon had expected, and 2 of which, the research team lead had told Mia with genuine surprise, were questions they were actively working on. They went out through the Sound and south, to the deep water survey area that Victor Vail had identified in his notebooks as the primary study location. The Marguerite ran well, not perfectly, because nothing runs perfectly, and the Volvo diesel had an opinion about sustained high RPMs that they accommodated by running slower than optimal, but well enough, solidly, the way something sounds when it's been properly fixed by people who cared about getting it right. The research team was 4 people plus Serena, which meant the boat was full in a way that required everyone to be comfortable with proximity, which they mostly were after the first day. Mia became attached, within approximately 4 hours of departure, to the team's acoustic engineer, a quiet man named Torres, who had the kind of patience with a curious 8-year-old that suggested either he had children himself or he'd simply decided she was more interesting than most adults, both of which turned out to be true. On the second day, out on the water in the late afternoon with the survey equipment running and the boat holding position in a light chop, Landon stood at the helm and watched his daughter learn how to read an acoustic data display from Torres, who was explaining it in terms she could follow, and Serena came to stand beside him. They'd been doing this more easily lately, standing near each other, moving in the same direction without discussing it first, the comfortable navigation of 2 people who have stopped having to think about whether there's room. It had happened gradually, the way most real things happen. Not a moment, not a declaration, just accumulation. He would have loved this, Serena said. She was looking at the water, at the survey equipment, at the data coming in on the displays below. He spent 4 years designing a system so he could see what was down there. He never got to use it. He's using it now, Landon said. She looked at him. Through the people he built it for. He held her gaze. Through you. That's not nothing. She looked back at the water. The light was changing in the late afternoon, going gold along the surface. The way the sound went gold in spring when the sun hit it at the right angle and everything went briefly beautiful without asking for attention. "I've been thinking about the harbor," she said. "Shill's Hole?" "The wider area. The community around it. Fisherman's Terminal, the working yards, the small operators." She paused. "When my grandfather started, he was one of those. Small operation, specific knowledge, working out of a rented slip because that was what he could afford." She looked at the water. "There are 40 or 50 operations like that around the harbor right now that are exactly where he was 40 years ago and have no pathway forward, no access to the kind of technology or collaboration that could change what they can do." He was quiet, listening. "I want to build something for them," she said. "A center, not a corporate facility. Something actually integrated into the working harbor. Technical training, research collaboration, access to the kind of equipment and expertise that those operators can't afford on their own." She paused. "My grandfather believed the research side of maritime was where the real value was. Not just financial value, genuine contribution to how we understand and work with the water." She looked at him. "I want to make that accessible to the people who actually work the water every day, not just the people who fund it." He thought about Denny at 64 with nowhere else to go, about the fishing company that had sold its fleet and walked away, the anchor client that had left a hole in his business that had taken 2 years to fill, about the specific kind of knowledge that gets built over 30 years at a working dock and has no formal credential attached to it and gets lost when the people who carry it can't make the economics work anymore. "Who would run it?" he said. She looked at him. He understood then what she was actually saying, had been building toward through the winter, through the coast trip, through the months of reconstruction that had been about more than a boat. "Serena, you know old vessels and what they're capable of better than anyone I've met who doesn't have 3 advanced degrees." She said it simply. "You know the working harbor the way my grandfather knew the water, from the inside, not as an investor, not as a researcher, as someone who has actually been there in the hard seasons." A beat. "And you're honest, even when it's inconvenient, which is the quality I have found rarest and most necessary in every person I've tried to work with." He looked at the water for a moment. He thought about the shop, about his crew, who were good people doing work they were good at, about the overdraft line that hadn't been touched in 4 months, which was progress, real progress, but which did not change the fundamental arithmetic of a small operation in an industry that was slowly consolidating around him. He thought about what Denny had said, less like someone trying to outrun something. "What would it look like?" he said. "A partnership. Vale Marine funds the facility and the program infrastructure. You direct the marine operations side, some vessel maintenance training, working harbor integration, technical apprenticeships." She paused. "Your shop would anchor the maintenance program. Your crew would come with you. Denny could teach if he wanted, or just do the work, or both." "You've been planning this since before the coast trip." "Since February, honestly." She looked at the water. "I wanted to see if you'd still be interested after you'd had time to think about everything that happened, after things settled." A pause. "I wasn't going to ask you when you were in the middle of it." He appreciated that more than he knew how to say. She'd given him the months of ordinary life, the new contracts, the business finding its footing before presenting an alternative. Not manipulating him with urgency. Waiting. "I need to talk to my crew," he said. "Of course. And I need to think about it." "I know. Denny's going to have approximately 40 opinions. I'd be worried if he didn't." She looked at him. "Take whatever time you need." He nodded. They stood at the helm together in the late afternoon light with the sound all around them and the survey equipment running below and Mia's voice coming from the stern asking Torres whether the fish could hear the boat or whether the acoustic sensors were too quiet for that. "Theoretically quiet," Torres was saying. "In practice, fish are opinionated about boats no matter what." Mia wrote something in the small notebook she'd started carrying. "I'm going to put that in my report," she said. "You're writing a report?" Torres said. "For school. My teacher said if I was going to miss 3 days for a boat trip, it had better be educational." "What's your conclusion so far?" Mia looked up from the notebook. She looked at the water, at the equipment, at the boat around her, and then back at Torres with the expression of someone whose conclusion had been formed before the question was asked. That the ocean is way bigger than anyone tells you it is, she said, and most of what's in it we don't know about yet. Which is kind of scary, but also kind of the most interesting thing I've ever heard. Torres looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "That's genuinely a good conclusion." Serena was smiling at the display panel in front of her, looking at the data coming in from 40 meters below the surface. The smile was quiet and private and not for anyone, which was the kind of smile Landon trusted most in people. He talked to Denny first on a Tuesday morning in May with the shop quiet around them and coffee going cold on the workbench the way it always did. He laid out what Serena had proposed in the same direct way she'd laid it out to him, without softening it or preloading it with his own opinion. Denny listened. He had the gift of complete stillness when he was actually paying attention, which distinguished him from most people who only looked still while they were waiting to respond. When Landon finished, Denny picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it down again. "What's the question?" Denny said. "What do you mean? You're presenting this like there's something you're not sure about, so what's the question?" Landon looked at the workbench. "Whether it changes things." "What things?" "Between me and Serena. If I work for her, with her, whether it changes what this is." Denny was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck was backing into the terminal, its warning signal the only sound. "The question isn't whether it changes things," Denny said. "Things always change. The question is whether the change goes in the direction of more or less of what matters." He picked up a fitting he'd been working on and turned it in his hands. "You've been running from the idea that something good could stick for 4 years. Since before I met you, probably." He set the fitting down. "This is what good sticking looks like. It's uncomfortable because you're not used to it." Landon was quiet for a moment. "When did you become a therapist?" "I've always been a therapist," Denny said. "You've just been too busy to notice." He picked up his coffee again. "Tell her yes. Tell your crew. Call me when there's a start date." He told Serena yes on a Wednesday evening, on the phone, standing in his kitchen while Mia was doing homework at the table. He said it without preamble, which she'd come to expect from him and appreciate. "Okay," she said. The word carried everything it had carried the first time she'd said it to him, back in the hallway of the Vale Marine building with the sound outside the window. Both of them equally committed, equally uncertain, equally willing. "One condition," he said. "What?" "Denny gets a title. He won't ask for one, but he should have one. He's been carrying that shop on his back since before I hired him and acting like it's just a regular job." A pause. "What title do you want him to have?" "Senior Marine Restoration Specialist, or something that says to anyone who looks at a door with his name on it that this is a person who knows what he's doing." "Done," she said without hesitation. He heard her smile in the word and didn't say anything about it. "Landon." "Yeah." "I'm glad you said yes." "I know," he said. "Me too." The center opened in September, which was faster than anyone had projected and was mostly a testament to what happens when you apply the right resources to a problem that people have been wanting solved for a long time. They called it the Vale Harbor Innovation Center, which was Serena's instinct, keeping her grandfather's name on the building but pointing it outward, toward the harbor community it was meant to serve, rather than inward toward the company that funded it. Denny's name was on a door. He never mentioned it, but Landon came in one morning to find him standing in the hallway, looking at the door with the expression of a man doing something private that he didn't intend to share. And Landon walked past without saying anything, which was the right thing to do. The first apprenticeship cohort was 12 people. 3 of them were from small operations in the harbor, the kind of places that had been running on expertise and stubbornness and not much else. One of them was 26, brand new to the industry, who'd heard about the program through a maritime training school and applied 3 times before getting in, and who turned out to be, within the first month, one of the most instinctively skilled composite work people Landon had seen. He told her this on a Thursday afternoon in October, directly and without ceremony, and she'd looked at him with the expression of someone who had been waiting for someone with standing to say it. "What do I do with that?" she said. "Keep showing up," he said. "The rest figures itself out." He believed that now in a way he hadn't 2 years ago. Not because anything had gone smoothly. Nothing had gone smoothly. There had been hard months and wrong turns, and the kind of fatigue that settles into your bones when you've been holding too much for too long. But because he'd watched someone who had every reason to stop fighting choose not to, and he'd watched a dead man's careful work find its way into the right hands through a chain of small acts that had started with a borrowed tray at a party where he didn't belong, and he'd come to understand that most of the things that matter most don't announce themselves. They just accumulate, quietly. Until one day you look at your life and it looks like something different than it did before. The Marguerite completed her first full research survey run in October, 5 months after the shakedown cruise. The data she brought back confirmed what Victor Vale had believed about the deep-water ecosystem in the survey area, confirmed it and complicated it, and opened new questions that would take years to fully pursue, which was, as Torres put it, exactly how you know a research program is worth continuing. Serena read the preliminary report at the kitchen table in Landon's apartment on a Sunday morning, which was where she spent most Sunday mornings now. Mia was at the table too, eating cereal and doing something on a tablet for school, and the apartment had the particular Sunday quality of a place that has been lived in well for a long time, which was a quality it had taken on gradually and without announcement. He was right, Serena said, setting down the report. About what specifically? Landon said, from the counter where he was making eggs that were going to be slightly overdone, because he was always slightly optimistic about egg timing. About all of it. The ecosystem stratification, the acoustic signature patterns, the survey methodology. She looked at the report. He spent 4 years working this out from first principles, and he got it right. She paused. He didn't get to see it, but he was right. Mia looked up from her tablet. That's kind of sad, she said, with the directness of someone who has decided that saying the true thing is more useful than protecting people from it. It is, Serena said. But also not sad, Mia said, working it out as she spoke. Because you got to see it, and you're his. So it's kind of the same. Serena looked at Mia. The expression on her face was the unguarded one, the one that lived underneath everything else, that Landon had been watching come to the surface more and more over the past year. Yeah, she said. I think that's right. Mia went back to her tablet, satisfied. The eggs were slightly overdone. Nobody complained. That afternoon, Serena took the Marguerite out alone for the first time. Not a research run, just a few hours on the water, the way her grandfather used to do. She'd told Landon she wanted to do it, and he'd understood without her explaining why, and he'd handed her the key code and said, check the bilge before you cast off. And she'd said, I know, Landon, with the tone she used when she was being told something she already knew, but didn't actually mind being told. He and Mia went to the waterfront to watch her go. From the shore, the Marguerite was small against the sound. A white boat on gray water, the newly repaired hull catching the afternoon light along its length, moving steadily south toward open water. Mia stood beside him at the railing, her chin on her folded arms, watching the boat get smaller. Dad? She said. Yeah. Are you happy? He looked at the boat. He thought about what happy meant when you were 33 and had been figuring things out alone for 4 years, when happy wasn't a single feeling but a texture that builds up over time in the way that the teak deck of an old boat builds up, in layers, each one adding to the ones before it, until the surface beneath your feet is something different than any single layer could have been on its own. Yeah, he said. I am. She was quiet for a moment. Me too, she said. They watched the Marguerite move across the water. The light was going gold now, the late afternoon light that turned the sound into something that looked painted and was just the world being honestly itself. The boat was small in the distance and getting smaller and still entirely visible, white against gray, moving with the kind of steadiness that comes from being properly built and honestly repaired. So, Mia said, are you both finally going to stop pretending? He looked down at her. She was still looking at the boat, not at him, with the expression of someone asking a question they already know the answer to. What makes you think we've been pretending? He said. She gave him the look, the tolerant, slightly disappointed look she'd had since she was 5. Dad? He looked back at the water. No, he said. I think we're done pretending. She put her head on his arm, which she did sometimes, less often than she used to because she was 8 and growing into someone with her own strong opinions about her own independence, but sometimes still. He put his arm around her shoulders. They stood there until the Marguerite was a white speck on the gray water, and then until she was gone entirely, and then a while longer because there was nowhere else they needed to be. Here is what Landon Pierce understood, standing at the waterfront in the October light, that he had not fully understood 2 years before when he'd borrowed a tray and crossed a room to help a stranger escape a crowd. Most of what breaks you isn't a single catastrophic thing. It's the accumulation of small surrenders. The contract you don't bid on because you're afraid of failing. The call you don't return because returning it requires explaining something you'd rather not explain. The version of yourself you slowly stop believing in, not because you decided to stop, but because deciding takes energy you don't have after the daily work of surviving. And most of what saves you is the same kind of accumulation going the other direction. A person who asks genuine questions and listens to the answers. A boat that needs someone who cares enough to get it right. A daughter who carries a depth chart in her jacket pocket and asks the questions that adults have learned to stop asking. The slow, uncomfortable work of letting someone into the parts of your life that you've been managing alone because you'd convinced yourself that managing alone was the only safe option. He'd laughed when Serena said, "I was hoping it could be you." Because the idea that something that good was meant for him had seemed at that moment like a kind of joke, the universe having a laugh at the expense of a man with an overdraft problem and a borrowed jacket. He understood now that the laugh was on the smaller version of himself, the one who had decided that surviving was the best he could reasonably expect. That man had been wrong. He'd been wrong about a lot of things, but he'd been most wrong about that. The Marguerite came back to the dock at 4:30, running steady on the sound the way she was built to run. Serena brought her in well, not perfectly, because the Volvo diesel had its opinion about low-speed maneuvering and you had to account for it, but well with the confidence of someone learning a skill they intend to keep. Landon caught the bowline when she threw it. He tied it off. Serena stepped from the deck to the dock with the ease of someone who had been doing it her whole life, which she hadn't, but was getting there. She looked at him. Her hair was loose from the wind, and she had the expression of someone who had just come back from somewhere that did them good. "How was she?" he said. "Perfect," she said. Then, "Not perfect. She wants to pull starboard in following seas. We'll need to look at the trim." "Already on my list." She looked at the boat. "She's good, though." "She's good," he agreed. The afternoon was going cold. The dock lights had come on automatically, the way they did as the day receded, laying their long reflections across the dark water. "Mia's waiting at the terminal," he said. "She has opinions about where we're having dinner." "She always has opinions." "Yeah." They walked up the dock together, shoulder to shoulder, in the way of people who have stopped measuring the distance. Behind them, the Marguerite settled at her dock in the quiet water, the name on her stern facing the sound, patient and permanent and still. The woman it was named for had been dead for 30 years. The man who'd named the boat for her was gone too. But the research was running, and the data was coming in, and the harbor was fuller than it had been. And somewhere in the accumulation of all of it, the restored teak and the correct keel bolts and the 37 files and the borrowed tray, and a joke at a gala that turned out not to be a joke at all. Something that had almost been lost was still here. Still here. Still running. Some things survive because they're protected. Some things survive because the right person comes along at the right moment and decides they're worth the work. Most things survive because of both. The billionaire who had been carrying an empire alone found out that carrying it alone had never been the point. The point was what you were building it toward, and who was standing beside you when you got there. The single father who had decided that survival was the ceiling found out that the ceiling was a decision, not a fact, and that decisions, unlike facts, can be changed. The little girl who carried a depth chart in her pocket knew both of these things already. She'd known them since she was old enough to understand that the ocean is bigger than anyone tells you, and most of what's in it we don't know about yet. Which is not scary. It's just where the work begins.